When is the last time you listened to a podcast about web development, web design, and small business and didn't fall asleep? Yes, we cover web development, web design, and small business, but like actual human beings with personalities. If you're a beginner, we're not going to talk over your head. It's more like asking your buddy for help. We have guests, we have fun, and let me tell you, these two can get off on a tangent. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to HTML All the Things Podcast. This is Matt Lawrence and Mike Curran.
That's it, everybody. We are back, and this is the HTML All the Things Podcast. This episode is titled, We Need, in all caps, we need to hire junior developers. So this episode is going to be touching on a bit of AI stuff, a bit of job market stuff, and sort of, I guess, the whirlwind that is, hey, we have this AI that isn't as good as a web developer. Is it worth hiring a junior dev when we could just replace the junior dev with an AI? But wait, is that sustainable? You know, what's going on here? And it's a whole conversation that we're going to get into. But the most important thing we're going to discuss today is, Mike, you've divulged to me today that MySpace, back in the day, this dates us, MySpace had too much music. And I was, like, before the show, literally about 5 minutes before turning this microphone on, I was crying laughing. Because I've never heard anyone say, man, MySpace had too much music. People's pages had too much music.
It would autoplay at full blast, fucking Linkin Park, every single page, thinking everyone was edgy. Like, it was the worst. And it was always the worst quality 8-bit bullshit, like, no, it was garbage. That was a terrible feature of MySpace. I'll say this. If you have autoplay sound on your website is trash, period. It's the worst feature you could possibly have. By
the modern standard, but everyone really wanted to hear, like, every single time they went to their
Linkin Park sound.
Yeah, of course. 3 Days Grace and whatever else, of course, 100%. In lower quality, you're right. For dial-up and a dial-up adjacent connection speeds, maybe DSL, your high-speed DSL. So maybe you could go from, like, I don't know what the bit rates are, but, like, you could maybe approach a CD bit rate. It's all right, Mike. Come on. Did you want to hear every time you go to your friend's post to, like, message them or something? Actually, another thing we were talking about, just to kind of cap this MySpace thing on, is that everyone would just be like, man, I'm working on my MySpace. And be like, what do you mean you're working on it? Like, I know that you're making a page, but do you want to do that? And I was like, man, I'm surprised that people gave up all those hours of work just to go to Facebook. And then you made a good observation, Mike. You're like, maybe no one wanted a page at all.
No one wanted a page at all. There's not an observation. This is a fact. As soon as Facebook came up, you're like, oh, I'm out. And those, like, 3 MySpace developers, I say that in quotes. Some are cool. Like, Matt, you were mentioning a really cool idea about, like, the guy that did the point and click. Sure, that's really cool. But 99% of people don't give a crap about that shit. They just want to connect with people. And that's what Facebook proved. They don't want to set up their page to have Linkin Park blasting in everyone's ears. They don't want to be able to have to go page to page and then have to mute everyone's music or mute your microphone or mute your speakers all the time. Shift between, like, imagine listening to music yourself on your computer and then having to, like, go to MySpace and, like, interact with your friends that have all autoplayed bullshit songs on their MySpace, and you're just, like, blasting music everywhere at full blast. It was terrible. Terrible decision. Terrible.
What I find really interesting is that it's also in an era in which multimedia wasn't super popular yet. So imagine the scramble to turn down the volume. Like, some people got the volume slider or the volume, rocker, whatever, on the actual speaker. But many people would have built-in speakers into their monitors, these big CRT monitors. It's like you're reaching for settings, whatever. Like, it's at what volume is this coming through? It's not as simple as volume. Like at full volume. It's not as simple as, oh, I'll just mute this tab so that whenever I go to the site, it won't play. Or on my keyboard, I have a wheel. I can just click a wheel and it'll pause, or I can scroll it down, like, or a button in a wheel, I should say. So, like, it just it started to kind of exist, with those keyboards that had, like, sort of the hump at the top above the function keys, where I had, like, the play, pause, next to whatever. But would it even hook into? Would it only hook into your Windows Media Player? Would it even hook into your browser is another question. Big mess.
Yep. Bad idea. Badly executed. And thankfully it died. So long live Facebook.
Well, Facebook's still around. I'm using Facebook.
That's what I'm saying. Long live Facebook.
Oh, I thought you said along with Facebook. I'm like, I don't have like Linkin Park blaring.
No, you're
on
good.
like we have the HTML all the things like page on Facebook. Go check that out, by the way. But just blaring. I kind of want to do it now. Just share like a few 3 Days Grace songs. Be like, feeling this while coding today.
I mean, I have nothing wrong. I have nothing against Linkin Park or 3 Days Grace. I have something against you blasting it in my ears unexpectedly when I visit your page. That's what I have a problem with. Like, I don't like autoplay. Stop autoplaying shit. And it's mostly stopped, so I'm happy. Matt brought it back up. It's triggered some PTSD in my head. So,
well, autoplay video ads have not gone away, and in fact, they're out of control. I would say they're floating around. It's picture in picture. You're closing it. It's reopening. Nightmare. So we have a little bit of MySpace in all of our modern websites. Is what we're saying. I guess.
Sure, I have Adblock on for that reason. I'll be honest. I don't Adblock YouTube. I don't Adblock X. I don't Adblock the sites that I visit consistently that I know don't have those ads. But my general web is Adblocked. I can't deal with. Like you mentioned, the autoplay video. I can't deal with it.
You know, there might be an episode in this because I have a screenshot. I gotta find it though. It's been a while. I went to I was playing a video game. It was a survival game. Didn't know the recipe for something. Go look it up on my phone, and literally the entire screen, short of like 2 lines of text that I can see, and that's legitimate. Everything's ads. There's like a fly-in thing. Hey, sign up for our newsletter. Hey, like there's cookies. We have a bottom nav bar. We also got a top like sort of marketing bar, if you will. And nightmare, like absolute, total nightmare. So bit of a mess, and not good.
Nope, it is absolutely not good. But you know what is good? Hiring junior developers.
Indeed.
Transition right into that. So inspiration. Why do we want to make this episode? We've talked about the job market. Not great. For new devs especially, it's terrible. Developers are having a very hard time breaking in. Even senior devs, like intermediate devs, are having tough times, like transitioning to new roles. It's a little bit easier for them still. But for junior devs, atrocious. Really, really difficult. We've gone through this before. That's another thing I want to bring up, and I'll talk about why. But we've had this situation before where for junior devs, it was extremely difficult to break in. But for senior devs, it was easy to move around, right? Like there was a situation maybe before 2018, 2019, 2020, when that was happening. And that led to some issues in the industry. I'll talk about them in shortly. AI is not really where you think it is. Okay, so this one's a big one. Everyone thinks that people should be lowering the amount of junior devs you have on your team because AI is there and they can help you. Yes, it's a tool and it's helping, but it's not replacing junior developers. Like it's not at the point where you can allow it to make decisions, period. And I posted on Twitter just asking, seeing the vibe. What are people thinking? I posted, I said, why should you hire junior developers? And I got a bunch of feedback. I'll have the link to the post in the show notes. There's a ton of feedback. I've taken some of it. I've taken some of my own, combined it. So this is directly, some of this was directly from the community and I agree with it. Some of this is something that I've just experienced myself. But it seems that everyone's very passionate about the subject because I think, first of all, from one hand, a lot of junior devs saw it and they're like, well, I want to be hired, so I need to participate in this. And I also saw some senior devs chiming in with their takes. And this is a combined effort. Like, in my opinion, seniors want juniors. Juniors want to be hired, right? The difficulty comes in when it becomes kind of like a monetary issue for a company and it becomes a time issue and et cetera, et cetera. Like the difficulty comes in more from a management perspective rather than developers not wanting junior devs on their team. For the most part, I should say some people don't want junior devs on their team, and there are some reasons there too, but we'll talk about that.
I have a thing to kind of bring up here. I don't know if this is a weird, I mean, it might be a weird comparison contrast, but I'm going to compare this to truckers. Now, hang on, I'm going to bring this up. This goes back to AI and stuff. This reminds me of when Tesla showed off their tractor trailer, I guess there's the tractor, the truck, the auto driving electric truck, right? And people started saying, people had already seen the sort of the betas and the alphas of these really early is what I mean, self-driving cars. And then this is the first, at least the first that I've seen of a tractor, a full on big rig truck that could self-drive. And, yeah, there was a place for a person to sit, but it came down to this question that was already sort of being whispered is, why become a trucker? This is not a field to get into because it's going to go away soon. And then this is a report from 2023 from the Ontario Trucking Association. I'm just going to read a very brief paragraph, which says, Canada has a shortage of about 20,000 truckers, and 1/3 of the current drivers are nearing retirement. See, this is a 1-to-1 according to the report. The shortage could reach 30,000 in the coming year, so it's getting worse, allegedly, if recruitment doesn't pick up. In June, this is the final sentence, in June, the Ontario government said about 6,100 truck drivers are needed across the province to fill the gap. That's just the gap. And this is a whole report, and I will include this in the show notes, of course, if you're interested in reading this. But this is an interesting, sort of thing, is that we've seen this sort of thing happen before, where technology comes in and it's like, is this job obsolete? That's not the whole story here. I know that there's going to be more we talk about, but it's a big piece is this job obsolete? And it's like, well, it's getting there, so why get into it? And then it's like, oh, hang on, but like, did we overestimate? Did we underestimate? And we'll get into that into the episode, but I just wanted to bring up that not only have we been here before, like you said, with junior devs in 2020, we've been here before with other industries in a, almost one-to-one sort of situation.
Yes, very true. And I'm sure that the parallels go deeper as well. Like, it's not just because of the Tesla truck that was debuted that we had the shortage. I'm sure it's because companies stopped hiring new truck drivers and they only hired seasoned truck drivers because they don't want to spend money like training. Like, it's all the same bullshit, right? And it all leads to it hurting the companies that make these decisions at the end of the day. Because now look, the truck driver is a perfect example. They have this shortage. Now what's going to happen? Well, they have to pay other truck drivers exponentially more money, the ones that are seasoned, than they would have if they would have just brought in a fresh crop of not junior truck drivers, like new truck drivers, like that would have made it so that the industry was a little bit more fair and a little bit easier to get into and stuff like that. Instead, now they have this bottleneck, and yeah, they're paying for it literally with a lot of money and lost opportunity to transport goods and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Like there's just, it's an obvious, like, in the face thing, and it's a lot to do with short-sightedness. A lot of what I'm going to be talking about is people being short-sighted, right? People think very short term in our industry, in tech, in many other industries, truck driving, and they don't see the benefit of investing in people. They don't see the benefit of investing in our industry as a whole. They don't see that because it's tough for them to calculate the ROI. And everything in business, everything in a company will come down to ROI. And that driving force will make decision making so difficult to make a decision that's more, quote unquote, I guess, altruistic, even though there is paths to ROI in all the decisions you make. Like hiring a junior developer, yes, upfront cost is high, even though like they're cheaper than a senior developer. You're talking like time waste and stuff like that. The reality is that the return on investment can be pretty big. Okay, because of the things we'll talk about.
Well, this comes down to humans being more reactive than proactive, of course, right? It's sort of a human trait or something that we see a lot, and that's a 1-to-1 parallel as well. And what's interesting is we do have examples, and maybe I'm wrong and oversimplifying, but we do have examples of businesses that are majorly successful that look way ahead. Like Jeff Bezos, famously or infamously, I don't know what his standing is with the general public right now, but he, would always say that Amazon's looking, 10 years into the future kind of thing. And he's fine firing up, the Fire Phone division, it not working, and then going, all right, and then they shut down the Fire Phone. Whereas other businesses would get, often caught in that analysis paralysis of, we don't have, a division that makes smartphones. What do we do? Oh my God. Well, if it fails, we have to shut down. Oh God, what do we do? And, I'm sure Amazon has taken parts of the Fire Phone, directly or indirectly, ideas or literal hardware ideas, or literal hardware implementations rather, and taken their learning experience as a learning experience, as value, as an asset of, okay, people didn't want, this crazy phone with like limited apps and these 4 cameras that were for, I forget what it was, like 4D or some crap. I forget what it was now, but they're fine with that being a thing. And that's them being like, hey, should we get into the smartphone industry? Oh, it's crowded. And they're out. Whereas other companies would just, oh no. And then they try to just hold on to what they have. And they're also worried so much about being caught with their pants down, like with the truckers. It's like they don't want to be the one company that has all these sort of like new or newish, because they've been trained a little bit, truckers in their fleet that they're like, oh my God, now we have to fire these people because self-driving's come in. What if none of our competitors have that? We got to pay all these people severance. We're going to look like idiots in the media. These are probably questions that have come across these desks. And I'm just assuming, I don't work for any sort of trucking company, but it is, they don't want to be the one to look like a fool. They're scared of it. Whereas people made fun of the Fire Phone, but I mean, you can still go buy stuff from Amazon. That's a realistic thing. Amazon's voice assistant kind of took the place of those buttons that Amazon had. You remember Amazon used to sell the little buttons where it would be like, oh, I'm going to buy like a Tide button. And when I click it, it's just going to put an order in and, goes through some sort of procedure to do so. But it's like a quick way of being like, I'm going to stick this button beside my laundry detergent shelf. And, oh, we're out of Tide. Click the button and it sort of, refills it in a semi-automated, if not completely automated way. But then it's like, oh, people didn't actually want that. But now we have these smart speakers. Like, there's so many ways that Amazon acts proactively. And I'm sure there's other companies that do this as well. I'm just using them as an example. But it's just interesting that other companies don't just go, oh, hang on, maybe we should do it that way. But to be fair, as my final note, maybe it's because Amazon has the cash cow that is Amazon.com and Amazon.ca, which is they can go around and make major mistakes because they know that people are still going to them as sort of like the we sell everything store.
So that's the thing. Like a lot of the issues in our industry for especially junior developer hiring aren't really coming from the big tech firms. The big tech firms are still, for like the ones that are hiring juniors because they are able to do this thing that you're talking about and think ahead and invest money, and they're big tech. Like they have tons of money. Okay. Yes, there's a little bit of a hiring freeze in a lot of them, but overall, they are the ones that are hiring the juniors. Like they're the pipeline. I think the pipeline should expand to other companies in sustainable ways because we can't rely on big tech to drive all of the, standards and practices and pipelines for every single developer that we would onboard after that. Like startups need to consider hiring junior developers from the beginning almost to be able to sustain themselves in the long run. Like it is a longer term view, and a startup has a very short term capacity, especially monetarily, but the overall outcome can be pretty drastically improved by taking a risk on hiring as well as seniors, junior developers on the team, right? So let me get into that a little bit right now. So why should we hire junior devs as smaller firms, as tech firms, whatever, right? Big reason, one of the first reasons here, easier to mold them into what the team needs. Okay, a junior dev is much more of a clean palette. A lot of times when a dev comes out of university or comes out of like an internship or a work boot camp or whatever, they are self-taught, however they come out, they're more willing to listen. They're more willing to, not even more willing, they're eager to. They're eager to figure out what the right way is. And I say right way in quotes. It's not a video podcast, but like the right way, right? They are well attuned to being able to listen to a senior dev's practices, whether they're correct or not, and a team's methods, rather than having another dev, like a senior dev, join the team that has been part of this process many times before and has their right way of doing it. I say right way in quotes. And now there's not only this like conformity issue, but you're now have an alignment issue on your team by hiring multiple devs of the same caliber, like higher end, senior devs, and making them align together. So there could be friction because of that. There could be just inconsistencies in your code base because this dev refuses to do it in this dev's way, and they're just dealing with it like that. That can happen. Whereas a junior dev, again, a lot of times they're wanting you to tell them how to do it. And the ability to mold them into what your team is using and what your team needs is understated about how key that is for cohesion and synergy in a team to be able to work towards a common goal. So it's this one, I think people interpret as not that important, but I want to make sure that it's clear that when you're managing a team of developers, having everyone on the same page with, standards and practices, how we do like pull requests, how we do scaffolding for these files, having everyone on the same page initially is going to make your code more maintainable. It's going to make it easier for people to do pull requests in the right way, like code reviews. It's going to be make it easier to maintain down the line, like in 2 or 3 years, right? When you have to go back and look at the code, it's going to be easier for you to build features quickly because you're not having to account for different methodologies of this in the same kind of file and thinking, okay, should I use this methodology or this methodology or this methodology? A lot of times that decision is made for you by like the previous code that was written by your senior devs. If you buy into it, it's going to make it easier, and it's easier for a junior dev to buy into it.
The molding is like a really important step for companies that have things that are really proprietary as well, or really specific. If they have a really sort of convoluted, complex, or even just an organizational structure, but technical structure especially, having somebody that only knows the basics, having just come out of some form of schooling or self-teaching, and then coming into your company and literally learning the ropes, but they're your ropes, if you will. Like they learn, this is how we handle tickets, this is how we handle this, etc. They're not, if you will, polluted with other stuff. They're not going to be like, well, my other company tickets were more efficient this way. Why don't we do it this way? Now, I'm not saying that making those suggestions aren't valid. Maybe there is a much more efficient way to do things. But some companies just want you to do what they want the way they want it. And if you are one of those companies and you're in charge of hiring, a junior dev may be a perfect fit. Yes, there is some learning curve and there's going to be some mistakes and stuff. But I mean, everyone makes mistakes. Everyone's going to have a learning curve to get into your specific system. Again, you're highly specific. So this is a major piece to consider when you're hiring, is that it's a give and take. It's like someone who is more experienced, maybe more experienced in the technical side of things, but they also may be more stuck in their ways of an old company, or they might just not be eager to like switch things around. They don't want to use Slack. They just want to use email, etc. Like Mike and I'm sure are stuck in our own ways. Like I'm not really a fan of Slack. That's just a personal preference. I don't have anything against Slack. That's just a personal preference. I prefer, email and stuff like that. I also prefer the Microsoft suite of products over anything else because I prefer consistency. I want to have one account that signs into multiple things, and that's just a personal preference of mine. I'm kind of stuck in that way. And so if I go work somewhere, I'm not going to force them to do it, but it's certainly going to have some bearing on, what I learned. When I first started working, I was a 2-phone person. I had a BlackBerry device, which was a work device, and I had a personal device as well, meaning smartphone. And like I went with just the one smartphone method, which is arguably more efficient, with the one smartphone method for work and professional. And I started going nuts, and I'm kind of stuck in that way where I had to go back and I had to have the 2 phones. It's just a reality that I had to face, where I was like, I learned to do this, and I'm, like that's where I was when I was eager and everything. This is what they said. They said, this is a personal device. This is a professional device. Here's how you manage your notifications and all that stuff. And I was a junior in IT, and it's like, okay, cool. You learn how to work that way. And then when everything comes into one device, you're like, oh my God, like I'm getting freaking bombarded. Like I'm out doing something or whatever, and I'm being bombarded by work messages that may not need to be addressed right now, but it is certainly derailing my thought, where I'm like, oh, I could just quickly do that. I could just quickly do that. And it just completely derailed me. I mentioned this story a million times, but that me being set in the way of separate devices is something from my junior days where I was taught that, and now I'm stuck in that way.
Yeah. And I think people are different in their sense of like being able to be molded and being accepting of different things. So like, it's a good point that I don't want to put everyone on the same stroke. Like hiring a senior isn't always going to make this weird division, but a lot of times it's kind of like inherent, and they're not trying to divide. They're just trying to go back to the way that they prefer. And by doing that, they're sometimes causing a little bit of friction in the team that could be something that could be avoided. So it's just one of those things that like it comes with the seniority. Like you can't really get away from it, but it's something that is different from person to person. Some people will be very adamant, like, hey, I'm just not using this, period. Like you hire me, I'm not doing that. And then you can make that decision. Hopefully they tell you that in the interview, and you can make a decision if that's a deal breaker or not. Yeah. But if not, then you're kind of screwed. You hire them, and then, you have to either conform them or you fire them. But yeah. So that it's a key one. It's one that shouldn't be overlooked when you're making a hiring decision. Next thing here, who will be the seniors of the future? So this one is big. Matt mentioned the whole truck driving situation. where there's just a shortage of truck drivers. Well, it's the same thing that can happen in our industry. Who will be the seniors 5 years from now when we've stopped hiring juniors, right? Like what's going to happen when companies need senior devs more than anything? And all of a sudden there's just a chokehold on every single senior dev. Well, you get what happens in kind of 2020, right? In 2020, when the market went boom, the tech market went boom, everyone was looking for senior devs. And what happened was a lot of times developers working at companies would get recruiters reaching out to them while they were working at those companies and get offered crazy salaries to go work at other companies, especially big tech. And this caused this like musical chairs of senior devs going across every company, switching jobs every year. I want to be clear here that I'm not saying that that's a bad thing for the senior devs to do, right? Like when you're offered way more money, that is probably the way you should go, because you got to think about yourself. You got to think about your future. You got to think about your family. The problem comes in is that like now you have no reliability in the industry. So you can't really rely on anyone that you hire to stick around. That creates a weird distrust circle between the founders of companies and the managers of companies and the developers that they hire, where now they're like expecting you to leave in a year. So now they have to plan towards you leaving in a year. So now they have to like do things differently, not offer you the benefits that they maybe would have offered you if they would have thought you would stick around, stuff like that. It makes a weird industry. Okay. Again, positive in the short term for those developers, but in the long term, the loyalty that you provide a company and the company that provides you is kind of mix matched here. And you're both kind of in this space where you're both aggressively against each other. Right. And I get it. You should never have loyalty to your company because your company never has loyalty to you. I understand that reasoning, but I think it's somewhat flawed in the sense that you got to have some like middle ground here where you can work for a company without having to look over your shoulder, and a company can work with developers without having to also look over their shoulders about losing them every year. There has to be some sort of middle ground on both sides.
It exemplifies the large company effect. The effect I'm talking about is when employees are treated just like a number because the company is at a scale in which it's no longer like, oh yeah, good old Bill runs that team. It's like, well, there's 18,000 Bills, or there's 1,000, managers, there's 100 directors, etc. It exemplifies that effect, meaning that a smaller company just ends up treating employees like cogs in the machine. The large companies do it due to the logistical task of being like, we need to literally manage 1,000, 2,000, 10,000 people. So we have to treat everyone like a number. And these people are just cogs in the machine. If someone leaves, there can't be a disruption. There has to be redundancies. There has to be a layer that sort of is a fail safe, a failover, where this person leaves. Okay, the recruiters come in, this person gets replaced, but there is someone else willing to do the job right away, and it gets done. Smaller companies almost have to adapt like this. They have to treat employees like cogs in the machine, where they go, okay, our job is pumping out websites as an agency. We need developers, marketing folk, and let's just say SEO folk. Let's just say the three. And that's what we need. And so the focus of management starts becoming on completing the task rather than having the sort of relationship. And this feels like an old school way of thinking where it's like, oh, good old Bill, he's been running, the blacksmith for the last 20 years or, whatever. But there is a value in that beyond money. It's sort of like you can go to Bill and be like, yo, man, like I'm in a jam. I need help. He might actually help you. Or, that Bill is always gone on Fridays and stuff. Like there's benefit in knowing the person. But in this case, it's just like you just know the job. You know the next goal. You know that you need these three teams to make websites. And so that's it. Everyone becomes a number, even when the company is only 20, 30, 50 people. And then it starts becoming a little bit weird like that, because at what point does the trust run out? If there's four founders, or do the four founders trust themselves and then everyone else beneath them they see as cogs, even the senior management, where they go, okay, well, Mike, he runs this department, but he's going to leave any time he receives an email that offers him more money. So we have to be ready to not get rid of him, but we have to be ready to replace him, as quickly as possible. So Mike is figuratively assigned to number 001. Okay, cool. So we always need a 001 here. And we need to always ensure that if 001 is leaving, that another 001 is promoted from within the ranks or hired from the outside the company, is recruited into the company. That it almost, it's like you're forcing a small company to like lose its childhood or something like that.
That's a very real situation that you're just outlined. And the unfortunate reality is that like that's kind of how it is.
Mm-hmm.
And in this episode or any episode, I don't have a solution for this. I want to be clear here. I don't know what the solution is because from both perspectives, the owner and the employee, yeah, like if the employee is going to get a letter saying that I'm going to pay you twice as much as you're making right now, like they would have to be an idiot to refuse it, right? And then from a company's perspective, if the company is losing money hand over fist, then they have to let someone go, right? Like they can't pay you if they can't pay you. And like it's indiscriminate in the sense that like it could be anyone on the company, regardless of your performance as well. Like that's what layoffs are. Okay. So like you can't fully trust, like an employee can't fully trust a company. A company can't fully trust an employee. The only people that can be trusted, you're right, are the owners. The owners internally can trust each other if there's multiple owners for the most part, because people backstab each other. So it's kind of a shit show. And that's a lot of reasons that companies have issues with like growing and like, you know, leveling up and creating
corporate
products
rot.
after, corporate rot, and like creating products after they've created their initial ones with their core team. Like that next step that a company takes, that maturing step, is very, very difficult because now you're introducing after the scrappy startup phase where everyone's kind of like just excited to be working on something. You're introducing this like management hierarchy infrastructure that inherently makes you feel like a cog, right? And then you start like, and then the process of like, okay, the company is now kind of doing well. Maybe those employees start to get poached. And then now the company thinks that their employees are, anyway, you mentioned it, like you kind of hit the nail on the head. It's a very difficult problem to solve, and it's not solved right now in the industry. The best way to solve it is to keep your employees as happy as possible and as paid competitively as possible. Like if you're paying them less than the industry standards, then the risk of them leaving goes up. If you're treating them worse than the industry standard, the risk of them leaving goes up. So statistically, you want to keep those as high as possible as you can internally to keep the statistics risk, not the people risk, but the statistics will be that it'll be harder for them to be poached if they're both happy and paid well.
Right.
Period. So that maybe is the way to kind of battle it a little bit, but there's no guarantee that you can fight it all the way through.
Well, I have 2 points to make. One's a slight tangent, but it is related, and that is that, you know, as these companies do kind of grow, there is a gray area. So we're kind of criticizing the sort of how most companies grow right now, from startup through, you know, I don't know, fully fledged company, I suppose. And that is that the growing pains are serious. There is a drawback though. So when we criticize that sort of path that I just mentioned, it sort of sounds like we're glorifying almost like the family business route, if you will. Or even if a person's not family, like, you know, they treat them like that. So it's like, oh, that manager's been there for 38 years and he loves it, and, you know, all that stuff. There is a drawback to family businesses though, and that is that there's an emotional aspect where it's like, well, you know, we would make $20,000 more a year if the shelves were arranged like this, but we can't do that because mom says no, you know, sort of things like that. Whereas in a company now, it's like, nope, the statistical, like this is better. Move that dang shelf, you know, get it out of here. And there may be some office bureaucracy and some hoops to jump through, but it's certainly not as, you know, sort of cutthroat as, well, mom says no, she's one of the owners of the business. She just doesn't like the shelving placed that way. So that's it. You know, mom and pop shop, that's it. And so they're going to lose out on however much money. So there is a gray area where we're not necessarily glorifying the mom and pop sort of smaller business method. There's drawbacks to it. And we've dealt with companies that are, say, from a legal perspective, medium sized, that are still trying to run like a family business. And it's a major pain because you'll prove all the points, like as a contractor, you'll prove all the points, you'll get everyone on board except for Papa, you know, whomever. And then Papa says, I don't like that. And then it's like, why? I just don't like it. And like that's valid feedback in a family business where it's like, well, we got to make sure Papa's happy and he has to sign our checks, I guess. So I guess that's it. Right. And so you get completely derailed, not by statistics, not by data, whatever, which is unfortunate. But the second point I have is related to this conversation. And that is that, you know, we're talking about these companies just treating employees like numbers, or in other words, sort of like cogs in a machine. But if you don't continue to hire new junior developers, you're fighting over a parts pool that is running out. We see this all the time with fixing anything, like fixing appliances, electronics, cars, whatever. If the parts are no longer made, you have to look for old new stock. You have to look for things like that. Think about people like in a drawer where there's literally cogs in this machine that are going to be hired, and then they're eventually going to be quote unquote thrown out because they've retired. They're no longer in the pool. And if you never bring in new parts, now all the companies are clamoring and fighting. This is like that 2020 situation, but they're all fighting over those cogs, over those limited parts. They're all after the old new stock, right? They're all after that. And if we, replace cogs with people, it's the same situation where if you don't have a fresh supply of people, there's a pool of people that is going to run out. It's not a question of if, it is a question of when. If the supply is turned off and the demand is not faltering or going away, the prices go up. You see this simply in the antique market where people are paying hundreds, if not thousands of dollars for signs that used to hang up in convenience stores from the 50s. Those signs are not made anymore. And people want to relive their childhood, and maybe they're just a fan of the product, whatever. People are paying hundreds, if not thousands of dollars for these signs, and all the collectors are after them. It creates a demand, it raises the price, and that's why they sell for that much. That is a real thing. That is a very simple market that is the same thing. Is like, I'm talking about signs, not people, but it's the same thing. If all the developers, if all the development houses need 100 people and there's only 50 people in the pool, there's only 50 cogs in the part drawer, everyone's going to be fighting. So the price of each cog is going to increase naturally, supply and demand. It's exactly what's going to happen.
Yep. And it has. It has. Like, the senior developers are extremely expensive. Even these times, there's a lot of layoffs and stuff. It's still expensive. Like, I've heard multiple times, staff engineers, very senior software engineers, their salaries are in the, 500 to 800 range before stock option. 500,000 to 800,000. I want to be clear here. That is a lot of money to be paying someone on salary. Mm-hmm. Just flat out. The problem isn't the fact that these people are making that money. That's fantastic for them. I'd love to make that money. No, nothing wrong with that. The problem is that prices out almost any other competitor that can pay those people. So the only people that are getting paid that money are the ones that are working for big tech, right? That's reality. So now you're making it so that every good developer is only working for these massive conglomerates, and startups are fighting over scraps. That's not good. It's not good for the industry. It's not good for the apps that are being created. It's not good for anything. It's the same thing that's happening with AI. The AI and conglomerates are just scooping up every AI developer they could possibly have for ridiculous amounts of money. And any scrappy small startup is having issues hiring because they can't afford $800,000 a year.
Right.
It's a lot of money to afford. And the only way to get that to a reasonable amount, I'm not saying lower it to non-living wages. It's not going to happen anytime soon, at least. I'm saying, make it more reasonable so that it makes sense for smaller startups to be able to start and grow and, pay their team fairly, and to be able to provide competition to these bigger, massive conglomerates and make for a more inclusive market. The more companies that can compete against each other, the better it is for you when the time comes that maybe your massive tech conglomerate has a layoff. Right. So that you can go from one company to another. So you're not trapped in this layoff farm and you're screwed because of the decisions of a few people. It should be a more democratized world out there. And the only way to do that is to provide more people into the industry that we can train up and become senior developers eventually, so that they can then go and train juniors.
And obviously, this episode is focusing on sort of the hiring and firing, and sort of the replenishment of workers. But for the people that are hired, by having the market be so, I guess you could call it temperamental like this, in my opinion, it's causing a problem for them too. Because, Mike and I have had this discussion where some projects that we've worked on just started becoming ridiculous, where it was hey, I'm just going to call you at any time. I'm just going to call you at any time, any way. You're not hired for on call, but there's work to be done at 4 a.m. on Saturday. So are you, you better do it. And it becomes that question of okay, well, do I bring a laptop with me everywhere? So then it's okay, well, I can work mobily. That works. But then you're like, yeah, but then why would I go out and do something if I'm just potentially going to work? I may as well stay home. So now your, quality of life, arguably, if you're a person that likes to go out and do things, it goes down. Or if you're always worried about, oh my God, I might get called or paged, because some people still have pagers if they're truly on call. I might get called or paged to come in at any time. And, it's my responsibility to keep this up. And like Mike and I have had this conversation where I say, like, there are activities out there that, let's say you go to like a dinner party. I guess you could pull out a laptop and do that. It's kind of rude and like people aren't going to like it, but it's possible. It's logistically possible. How logistically possible is it to do something else? Like if you had an activity, any sort of activity, golfing, visiting a friend that lives out in a rural area, you have to constantly maintain internet connection. What if there's just no good internet out there? What if you're in a movie? Can you pull out a laptop and start working in a freaking movie? Type thing. But this is that's a real question. Like, is it acceptable for you? Am I allowed to go to a movie if I need to be? No, the answer is no, you can't. You cannot. You cannot go into the country. You cannot go anywhere where there's bad internet. If your internet goes down, you better have a redundancy. These are real, and this is restricting you now. This isn't restricting the job or whatever. These are things that will come up because these companies are now hiring less people for more money. And so now they're going to start arguably taking advantage. They're going to be like, well, there's mobile tech. I might as well just keep calling and emailing you and calling all the time. And it's a serious problem. And it doesn't. And also I'd like to point out that Mike and I have had this conversation with clients many a time, and we've had this conversation on this show in detail, which I'm not going to get into. But the point of the matter is like, we'll then say, okay, we'll do on call. This is how much it is. And they're like, well, hang on. Whoa. What do you mean there's a price associated with it? And it's like, well, you're getting a service. Like, what do you mean? A lot of these people that are hired on salary, they're like, oh yeah, it's, 9 to 5, some weekends if there's like a project, Monday through Friday normally. It's like, okay. But it's like, but by the way, every Saturday, Bill likes to check the databases and he only checks them on Saturdays. So he'll always message you on Saturdays. And if Bill reaches out, you have to do it right away. So it's like, okay, so Saturday's gone. Why go out and try to do anything on Saturday? And you could argue like, oh, you're being lazy. Like, you should be ready to work at all times. Again, it works for some people, but if you want to do anything that in which a laptop is not acceptable to pull out and start working randomly, it's going to start affecting your actual quality of life. So this situation is not just affecting those in the recruitment, the hiring, firing, retiring sort of part of their lives. It's also affecting people that are actively in the industry. It changes the job.
Yeah, it absolutely does. If you don't have cross-team communication, if you don't have a way for people to cover you while you're out, yeah. And that stuff happens when you hire the right amount of juniors so that they can, cover you and stuff like that. Like you need that kind of coverage for people to take vacations. Like it's really difficult to organize a vacation if everyone is in charge of their own verticals and have no cross-team information. And like, one of the next point that I'm going to talk about is exactly this. Like, if there's only senior developers, what ends up happening a lot of times is that senior developers don't typically teach each other. They do sometimes. They do have like powwows and like, you go through debugging processes together, stuff like that. But for the most part, you're operating at the same wavelength. So you're able to like look at each other's code and understand what's going on. You're not needing that process of hand holding. You're not needing that process of the advanced documentation to onboard someone. It's just like, hey, you've seen this a million times, go at it. And a lot of times seniors can pick it up, right? Like they don't need as much hand holding. Because of that, the code that you write is going to be targeted a lot of times at senior developers, right? So you're writing code that's at a higher level without much documentation, without many comments, because you're expecting another senior developer to come in and save you if when you leave, that's it, right? Like the process of you having to pass knowledge down is very limited in that situation. With juniors, on a consistent flow of juniors on your team, the thought process of a senior dev has to change. And it usually immediately does. The good senior developers, I should say. What happens is then you're like, okay, well, now I have to think about, next week we have a junior developer starting. To limit my onboarding, like to free myself up, I need to write this code in a way that makes it so that the junior developer can finish off whatever features I need them to finish off, can understand what this code does. It's documented so that maybe in 3 months when a new junior developer comes, they can come into it and they can teach each other and stuff like that. So now you're thinking completely differently about the code that you're writing. And usually, again, that makes for you writing much more maintainable, much more readable, much better code, right? Like you're writing for the people that are coming next and reading your code, not for the gigabrains that are already on your team that understand the context of everything that's going on. That's a different code base. That's a much better code base that you're creating that's maintainable, that can survive a layoff, that can survive a person leaving the team. Like a lot of times when startups are fresh, if a senior developer leaves, boom, you're screwed. Like, yeah, other people can pick up their slack, but like it's tough to bring them up to speed because they didn't write the code for any other people to be able to read it. They wrote it for another senior developer to help them out here and there, and that's it. It's a different kind of code. The next thing here, a fresh perspective. So junior developers usually graduate at different times. They go through different boot camps. They come up with a different set of skills. So a junior developer from 3 years ago will have a different set of skills than a junior developer of today, right? They like a junior developer. I'll give an example. 3 years ago, it wasn't as popular to have these like full stack app frameworks like SvelteKit, Next.js, Nuxt, all of those frameworks. 3 years ago, it was more popular to have an MPA style framework where you're just using the base framework like React, Svelte, and Vue, right? And that perspective is different than today's perspective of, hey, I can build this whole thing that you're separating out into different code bases. And here's my perspective on why I can do that. Like you're getting a fresh perspective from a technological standpoint in meetings where a junior developer can speak up and give their ideas because they've done it differently now. They've learned it differently. They have a new way of describing solutions to problems. Now, not everything, and a lot of times a senior developer will push back like, why would you do that, et cetera, et cetera. But a lot of times it can be that little push that is needed to change up some old infrastructure, some old architecture. Because then they're like, oh, wait, well, why is this thing created? Maybe it makes sense for this app to be built in this full stack framework, rather than us having to spin up a separate server and a separate front end and stuff like that and maintain the two for the small app might make sense. So now they're bringing new ideas that are simplifying your code base, that are making it better, that are using new technology. You can only really get that if you have either a really plugged in senior developer, which is totally possible. Like people stay plugged in, but a lot of times when you're really in it in the weeds, you don't have time to keep up with technology. You're in your zone of like, this is what I'm working on. That's what you're focusing on. And you get into this, you start to lose track of what's currently the best thing to do. And that could lead to opportunity loss, opportunity cost, could lead to many different little things. Could be fine. Like, people's applications are still built, like very sophisticated applications are still built with PHP, just standard PHP, and they're still perfectly fine. There's nothing wrong with that. It's just a lot of times something new will come out that might make the process a little bit faster. So maybe something that was built with PHP that took, 6 months could have been built with Next.js that could take 2 months with the right team. So like you're losing out on those kinds of things rather than maybe like, functionality. Like anything can be built with anything.
The thing, I guess, too, is that it doesn't necessarily have to be a technical tip. It could be something as simple as like, hey, my friends all use this app and we're building this other app, and the reason why we're not using your app and using, a competitor app is because of this. And it is a fresh perspective in that, oh, like I didn't even realize that people wanted to have, X feature. Interesting. Let's take a look. How many people are using that feature, right? And that's just one example of something. It could even be something as simple as like, hey, I use Copilot to manage, and this is just an internal thing. I use Copilot to manage my calendar or something like that. This is how I do it. And then other team members, and not even company policy, but other team members start becoming more efficient because someone shows up and says like, yo, this is how I do things. This is a really key thing that like Mike and I have been talking about a lot, is that like I'm a very manual person on the computer, which is weird for someone that uses computers so much, but I like being in control of each step and stuff. But I've started trying things out. I'll try out, okay, I'll do an automation. I'll spin this up and try it. And I do kind of beta test it, but I force myself to do it now. And then I go, whoa, I don't have to think about doing this anymore. This has been automated. This is fantastic. Or, whoa, this is not the way to do it. But at least I tried it out, and I can apply that learning to something else. And like a fresh perspective, in my case, I'm reading blogs and reading social media posts that are giving me the fresh perspective. But for companies, the fresh perspective really does oftentimes come from people that are fresh in the industry or just different backgrounds and such coming into the company and bringing things up and saying like, hey, you can do this. Famously or infamously, maybe people say, you can't develop on Windows anymore. And then there's so many people out there that are just like, I use Windows to develop. And I personally am one of them. More or less a Windows purist. I like, again, having most of my stuff in one ecosystem, and maybe I'm like, closing myself off, but it is also a fresh perspective for some people where some people go like, oh, maybe we don't need to have Macs for everybody and we could actually save a bit of money because we're fleeting them out to 100 people. Maybe we could just put Windows out there. I thought we could only use Macs. That's a fresh perspective. Something that, isn't necessarily technical in that, hey, let's use this framework. It's just another way to think things through, another way for the team to organize, or a way to be more efficient with company funds.
Yeah, exactly. Just different perspectives are super key for any company. Like that's why diversity sometimes is mentioned too. Like it's not for like, oh, we want everyone to be part of the team and all that. It's for fresh perspectives. Like different people raised in different ways give you new perspectives on different solutions. Like they solve problems differently, which could actually benefit your team quite a bit. Mm-hmm. When everyone thinks the same, you come up with the same potentially bad solutions all the time. Next thing here is that seniors cost a lot of money. So we've touched on this already a few times. The reason that seniors cost a lot of money is that there's just not a good junior pipeline. And this money is great. Again, I would love to make $800,000 a year. Not saying that that's a bad thing for anyone. But the thing, the reality is that it makes it so companies can't afford good developers. And now you're having subpar products built to compete with massive monoliths, and you're screwed. Like that makes it so that obviously Google will win or Microsoft will win no matter what. Do you want that? Do you want that to be the future that we live in? Like that these massive conglomerates are always winning no matter what because they just have deeper pockets and they've choked the developer market so much, right? Like it's one of those things where ideally I would want a better, more equal playing field. That's not to say that seniors should be making, very little amounts of money, but we need to have it so that it's a little bit more attainable, at least for smaller companies to be able to hire a good senior developer and, have the best experience and the best platform that they can build so that they can make something that competes with a larger company. That's all. Like this one's a little bit more hand wavy and a little bit tougher to talk about because again, I don't want to take anything away from people that are already making this amount of money. Like it's great. And they worked themselves really hard to get to that point. And that's very good. It's just, I can see it as an industry being not sustainable.
There are like kind of talks and whispers, well, not even really whispers. I see it a fair bit on LinkedIn actually, which, I don't know how much it translates to reality, but there's a lot of people that will stay with a job despite money because the amount of money they make is enough to do whatever they do, live the way they do, save the way they do, whatever, invest the way they do. But they like the job. And there is sort of that talk of like, hey, like I want like sort of I don't want the mental anguish of hopping around, learning, meeting new people all the time, doing things. I would prefer to be like, okay, this is stable. This is good. I'm happy with this. And that ties into what you were talking about earlier, Mike, where companies can make the employees happy. And, there's ways to do that. And we can kind of touch on some of those, such as health insurance, is one thing where like there's people out there that have 100% coverage of like, say, drugs and dental. Like that's a huge savings. And it's like, oh, I may be getting paid $1,000 less a year, but I'm getting, $1,000 or $2,000 or $3,000 worth of dental a year. So I'm actually up $2,000. I'm actually effectively making money, like I'm getting my value. Or, hey, these other companies are going to pay me $1,000 more a month. So that's $12K more a year. But not only is some of that going to go to income tax, but also this company is known for riding their devs, riding their employees to the ground where they constantly call, they constantly page, they constantly bug. And that like sort of corporate shaming when it's like, you do have vacation time, but there's work to be done here. And it's sort of like the stare down of like, we are legally obligated to offer you vacation time and you could take it. Will the team suffer if you leave for a week? It's sort of like the code for don't take this time. Please don't take this. Please don't take, our vacation offering seriously. please just keep working for us type thing. That is like not having that at your current job is a mental anguish avoided, right? It's a bit of mental peace, if you will. So there is like a bit of that certainly happening in the industry now. Like I said, it's being talked about on LinkedIn and hopefully being translated a fair bit so that some senior devs that are just, sort of in sort of a golden age of their career where they're very skilled, but they're still working, they could just say, you know what, I'm going to get 100% drug coverage, have a great retirement plan, and I'm going to work for, X company. And even though I'm getting paid $30,000 less, I'm kind of not, because they're matching my retirement payments. They're paying for all this like insurance stuff. They're allowing me to work remote. They're making me happy, and I'm still able to afford everything. So it comes to a point of like, why have all this extra cash and then have to worry about my dental, driving into the office, working on the Saturdays, etc. So happiness does fall into this. Seniors do absolutely deserve to make money. Like, as you get promoted through a company, you make more money from junior through senior to directors and all the rest of the, whatever the corporate path is at your particular company. You do generally get upgraded in your pay, but pay can also not just be money. Pay can be these other things that I've mentioned as well.
That's exactly it. And like happiness is underrated, I think, for a lot of companies. And if you can make people happy, that's going to very much increase their chances of staying. Like you can look at Europe as an example. A lot of European companies will pay significantly less than American companies, right? And chances are that a lot of those devs could work on a contract without many benefits for an American company and make like twice as much as they make for the European company, but they would lose all of their other benefits. And that seems to keep a lot of the talent local, because they're able to take 4 weeks off. Not only able, they're forced to take 4 weeks off. That's one of the rules of the company or the rules of the law, like of Europe. They're able to, have 2 years of paternity leave. Like there's just a bunch of these little side benefits, like Matt said, that really do make a huge difference in people's lives. And yeah, you're still going to lose some people to ridiculous salaries. That's fine, in my opinion. There's nothing wrong with that. But a lot of times, if you can keep the core or keep a higher percentage happy, that's going to make a more consistent environment for everyone on the team. And even people leaving will be leaving begrudgingly, with the chance of maybe even coming back later. Like if you have the right environment where you can, retain them in a year or two at a similar salary that they were at, because they were just so happy being with you, like in that environment. And happiness doesn't come without pressure. Like I'm not saying, treat them as if they're fragile or anything like that. Like sometimes you got to put pressure on them. Like you need to get something done. But overall, there's a way to make it so that the corporate environment can feel less corporate and can feel more like you feel more valued. You feel more like you're part of the team. You feel like your time is valued. Like when you're working, you're working. When you're off, you're off. It's a different feeling than a lot of corporate environments give you, especially tech companies. The next thing I have here, it's a little bit altruistic. I'll say it, but I think with everything that I've said before, it's the right thing to do. Okay. So this is, again, it's not tangible and there's no ROI on this one, but the reality is again, if we don't have a way of teaching the younger generation or the generation that's coming up our skills, it feels like we're kind of just, I don't know, like it's an empty feeling, at least to me. Like I love being able to mentor developers coming in. I love being able to unblock them. I love solving hard problems that they're having issues and then learning how they debug differently and then teaching them new ways to debug and stuff like that. I love like setting up the scaffold. Like that stuff is really interesting to me, right? Because I screwed up sometimes too. Like I'm not perfect in any way. I'm not the greatest developer of all time by far, but passing on some of the knowledge that I've gained over the years is part of my process of being a developer. If I wasn't able to do that, I feel like part of me wouldn't be interested in this part. That's why we do this podcast. I want to be clear here. Like we pass on our knowledge. That's why we do the blog on htmlotherthings.com. We're passing on knowledge. That's why I try to push teams that I'm on to hire junior developers, because I want that experience of passing on knowledge. And I'll be blunt, not blunt. I'll be real with everyone right now that we are very selective in the junior developers that we hire. Okay. But we do hire them. And most of the time when we hire them, they exceed expectations. So as a company, you have to know that a lot of times junior developers are like foaming at the bit to prove themselves. And I'm not saying take advantage of that, but you can hire them and see that for yourselves. It's a really interesting concept. It's a really interesting thing that you can kind of benefit from because they just want to prove themselves. They want to get into the industry. They're really interested in the stuff. A lot of times they're just passionate about code, and putting those and giving them some ownership of the products that they do and seeing them grow is going to benefit you as the company. I can guarantee you a ton, because they're going to be cheaper than your senior devs, and they're going to sometimes do way more just because they're willing to put in that time and effort because they're trying to get in. And then they'll grow into that senior dev role. I think that's a big thing, is like, if you don't hire juniors, who's going to grow into that role? You'll always end up in this like circular fashion of hiring a senior, training them up like in your ways, and then having them leave, when you can be doing the same thing with juniors and establishing a better environment for them and making it so that it's not harder for them to leave, but it makes less sense, right? Like giving them proper raises with their title changes, stuff like that. Like there's a lot of things you can do to keep juniors and keep that pipeline of juniors to seniors going on your team, so that you always have a balance that if a senior leaves, you can promote a junior into their position. That's how you should be thinking of your team dynamics. Last thing I do want to talk about is the AI part of this equation, right? We mentioned earlier on in the episode, the Tesla AI example is a really good one. So like they showed the trucks that could drive themselves, and everyone freaked out, right? Everyone freaked out from all different industries. Like I remember Matt and I probably talked about it for like hours one day, where we were just like, well, I guess truck drivers are just gone now. Like in the next 5 years, no more truck drivers, because everyone's just going to be, hasn't happened. Not even relatively close hasn't happened. Not even like a little bit hasn't happened. If we look at the self-driving that we have right now, we have Waymo, which is in California and Arizona, I think. Like there's a couple places where they can do their full self-driving literally without a driver. That's the closest we have right now with it. There's no driver in the seat. They're like a taxi service in a city, but that's it. That's all we've had after like 10, 20, 15 years of this discussion. And it's a small amount of vehicles that are doing it. One company like Cruise or whatever it is, the GM one, wasn't able to continue operations because they had some issues. It's a very difficult problem to solve, as we've learned. Tesla has a full self-driving mode. I'm saying that in quotes, where it kind of works, it kind of doesn't. It's not close to being able to like be a robo-taxi, in my opinion, or like from what I've seen, it's not there yet. If any weather happens, like rain or snow, that's it. They just shut off. There's no self-driving. Okay. And we haven't figured out a technological way to fix that.
Oh, because you can't see, right? The sensors, right? Because like modern cars that are human driven, you always get that doo-doo, can't see, or like your front sensor is blocked. Doo-doo, your rear sensor is blocked.
Yeah, there is no technology that can fix that yet. It's going to be probably a mix of cameras and LiDAR and all that, but it just doesn't exist. Okay, so we don't have a solution for that. So that means that anytime it rains, that's it. Like no self-driving. So how are trucks going to do it? Realistically, they're not. We're not there yet. So like, someone wants to be a truck driver now, you're safe for a while. Eventually, maybe in 50 or 60 years, who knows? There might be something. But the point that I'm trying to make with this isn't about self-driving. It's similar with AI. AI is a little bit different in the sense that we're not talking a lot of times about human lives. But sometimes you are. Like there are some life critical systems that are being built. Like, would you trust an AI? Would you trust Devin to build like your heart rate monitor, like, or your pacemaker? You wouldn't. Like, you would not do that. That would still require a person, no matter what. They would require a person probably not even touch AI, because every line of code you write is potential for death. Like any of those systems will always be very, 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 very critical in the sense that no one but the best can touch them, and they'll be reviewed to death and stuff like that. So. But other systems like less mission critical, less life critical, sure, AI can help in those systems. So AI is being part of the toolbox of web development, of the programming right now. As people that use it, right? As the grunts, I would say, that people that are down on the ground, down on their keyboards, typing away and using Copilot on a daily basis, I think everyone can agree that it cannot ideate. Okay, so you cannot tell it a problem and have it come up with a multi-step solution that is of worthwhile consideration. It can do it. Again, Devin was a good example of like a little bot that can go through and kind of look at your issues and come up with solutions. But most, if not all, of the solutions that it comes up with are going to be fairly jank and not really usable by a real company. Okay. They're going to be either solutions that are kind of in place that need adjustment, or solutions that are just bad from many different perspectives, or just it's just going to make your code weird and bad and just maybe not even work a lot of times. Okay. If you give it the ability to ideate, if you give it the reins of like, hey, solve this problem, it can be used to be guided and solving problems like while you're guiding it. So like if you needed to repeat a bunch of blocks for you, like instead of typing out a JSON file with, 15 different, animals in it, you can ask it to do that. You're giving it guidance. It's doing the task that's being guided by you. And then you go in and you adjust it, right? Like that's something it can do today, and it does it pretty well. And it can infer some of the things that you're trying to do based on your code base and make it easier for you to write a function that, grabs a block on your website and transports it from one end of the website to another end of the website, as long as you give it that guidance. So you're telling it what you want it to do, whether it be a comment or you're starting to write the code, and you're seeing it form that conclusion, right? And then you're maybe adjusting it to your code style, whatever, right? Like, so it can do some things. What it can't do, again, is it can't really fully debug. It can help you debug. It cannot fully debug. It can't write fully maintainable code. It can't solve problems for you from scratch for the most part. It just can't do any integrations with third parties that have libraries that aren't as popularly used as something like a React. Like if it's outside of React, Svelte, like the big ones, it just loses context. It doesn't have that information. It's not able, it just guesses at that point. It starts to really break down when you start giving it complex tasks. And the more you use it, the more you realize that it's happening. From a very high level, though, and this is where the problem comes in, when a manager sees something like Devin, they're not using AI at a low level. They're not using it in an everyday way for coding tasks. They're seeing a demonstration and they're thinking, okay, how can we replace X and Y with this? And what will end up happening is that instead of hiring junior developers like we should, yes, sometimes we'll be using these AI platforms to replace them, quote unquote. But what that will do is just put more pressure on the senior devs to wrangle AI together to be able to come up with solutions with AI, and then have no one to be able to pass that knowledge on to when they leave. So now you're stuck in the situation where a senior dev was doing a lot of the work that maybe a couple junior devs was doing with AI, but you're stuck in a situation where you have no one has picked up that knowledge because AI can't transition yet from that like toolbox to the Devin of the world of like actually being a junior developer. Whether that happens in the next 5 years or whether it be more of a, AI, self-driving truck situation that we talked about, we don't know, but most likely it's going to be something in between that. And there's still a lot of time when you need those junior devs to come in and become senior devs and be able to wrangle AI for you. Like you still need that pipeline right now for sure, because at the end of the day, you're still, even if AI gets significantly better, you're still going to need someone to review the code. You're still needing someone to interface with it. You're still going to need someone to go end to end and use the tools in the proper way. Like you need a good senior developer a lot of times in that case. If you have a junior developer that has first been brought up with AI as their only way of learning and then be put into the situation where they have to wrangle AI, that might be a really bad situation too. We talked about last week's or the weeks before episode where junior developers shouldn't be focused on AI tools when they're learning because they need those core skills to be able to wrangle the AI tools themselves. So we're again getting ourselves into a situation where we could have it so that senior developers are even more valued due to their ability to wrangle AI tools to get more performance out of themselves. And then again, it's back to everyone just trying to poach the best AI wrangler rather than train up a junior developer to take over the reins at some point.
It feels like this AI debate, if a company were to go all in on AI, they're treating the AI like a person. We had a discussion that Devin, was being advertised as the first, I forget now, it's like the first AI engineer or software engineer or something like that.
That's what it was, yeah.
And like that to me is a big thing. That's a big marketing angle, and it's interesting to see that a machine, even though it's almost like a meme at this point, but a machine is being advertised as a replacement. And the question really is, and I've raised this on Threads a few times, is AI going to replace us? And the answer I hear is, well, no, that's not true. That's not true. And I think it's possible. It's very possible. But here's the thing. We do not know the peak of this technology yet. We don't know whether the engineers at play working on these AI LLMs are going to spin out, where they get to a point of complexity where these things are able to be better than they are right now, but then they get stuck for 10 years. I mean, it's like the self-driving where, there's still a debate over, is it LiDAR? Is it radar? Is it cameras? Is it just one? Is it this? Is it that? Is it this? The weather is a good point, where the weather is, I guess you could say it's an edge case, but not really, because cars drive outside, and you know what I mean? Like it's like, it is a question. And so I equate this AI stuff from what you said, Mike, as companies putting all their eggs in one basket. And when you were talking, I kind of trying to jumble this thought around in my head, and I thought, well, I guess all their eggs are in one basket right now with people, if you think about it, where they're only hiring people. But then, I kind of continue thinking, and I think, well, people are a variable in and of themselves. Some people are geniuses. Some people are sort of average intelligence, et cetera, et cetera. Some people are more dedicated. Some people aren't. Some people are very good at one thing. Some people are bad at another. Like, people are all over the place, right? They're variable. They live in different places. They're from different backgrounds. We talked about, sort of the fresh perspective. And so when you put all your eggs, quote unquote, in the basket of people, it isn't just, that's all you're doing. Like, you could always go find someone who's, more smart in this area. Like, oh, my engineers right now are very good at, I'm just going to make this up. They're very good at data entry, but they're not very good at managing the database itself, the actual technical side. I better go get an SQL expert. Like, that's a different person, right? So it's you're not really all eggs in one basket. So my conclusion I've drawn in my head from this conversation, from what you said and all the other things we've talked about with AI so far, is that it makes sense for a company who's proactive, of which we've already talked about people being reactive, but who's proactive is to explore AI and use AI so that you're not left behind. If your developers become 20% more efficient due to AI helping them out, you don't want to lose out on that 20% more productivity. However, if you notice that it's a degradation of 20%, then maybe you should back out. But here's the thing. Because AI is so early, some people go, well, this is the future. I'm going all in on AI. I'm not hiring junior developers anymore. Now you really are putting your eggs in one basket. And yes, there may be, multiple Devons in the future, of which, there kind of already is with Copilot, ChatGPT, et cetera. There's already some variants. But the thing is that this LLM stuff is so new that I think you can roughly kind of pool it all in one. And we don't know where it's at. Even with the self-driving, we pool self-driving all together. There is some nuance to that, though, right? There's Uber self-driving, Tesla's doing it one way. There's a whole bunch of companies. I think even BlackBerry in Canada is or was doing it, partner with a company to do it. There's multiple ways, multiple tool sets, etc., on how to do it. There's different ways there's different cars out there, right? But we all just say cars. And when you get into the weeds, we start dividing them up into Chevy, this, that, and the other thing. And so my point is that I think with AI, if you were to go all in on AI, you are literally putting all your eggs, at least at this point, into one basket. And that's usually not how things are taught. Usually diversification is taught. In certain circumstances, that's not the case. But in this case, imagine you go in all in on AI, you get rid of all your recruiting people. You only have the people that are project managers, that are AI prompt engineers. And then you realize that your productivity is down 30%. Well, how much productivity, you've lost 30%, but how much more are you going to lose having to hire recruiters and then get the recruiters on board to hire junior developers again? This is so early. This isn't something that's 95% certain that it is going to replace us. And you're missing out by just being like, no, I only use people, right? We're not there yet. Not even close. I mean, the very fact that Devon is kind of a meme at this point proves that it's almost too early. And if you want to be a pioneer in it, sure, but going all the way in, like, it's how many companies and products have failed going into something too early? Like, the PSP was famously a commercial sort of wishy-washy thing, but then smartphones came out, right? Like, the PSP was ahead of its time. It did music, it did videos. It was connected to the internet. You could play games on it. And it wasn't like, oh, bring, just my iPod around. All of a sudden, iPod Touch comes out, and it's basically a PSP. But the PSP was wishy-washy, right? Wishy-washy sort of commercially. Yeah, there was, 3-ish versions of it and whatever, but it was never considered this mega monolithic product. OnLive was game streaming before game streaming came out. OnLive was years ago. And then I think it got purchased and looped into something else now because it's been years and years. But the point of the matter is they were like, yeah, like, you can do it. Like, we people can stream games, but it's such a new concept. And internet was still kind of new. And people having good internet speeds and good internet appliances is so wishy-washy. So it's like the OnLive guys, went all in, and maybe they got, maybe the company got purchased and there was some success to be found there. But we're not talking about OnLive in the zeitgeist anymore. So it's too, I think it's at that point to bring my, kind of talk to a conclusion. It's just, we're too early to make a call. And you should be, if you want to be proactive, you should be making sure that you keep an eye on AI, seeing its effect on your current developers, but you really should still be hiring junior developers because you don't want to end up like the trucker crisis, if you will.
I couldn't have said it better myself. That was a great way to wrap it up. Keep hiring junior developers. That's the goal of this episode because it makes sense from a financial sense. It makes sense from every sense. We don't know where we are at right now. It's going to benefit you in the long run. Even if AI were to come in and do the things that you think it's going to do, you need developers to be able to wrangle it. Those are going to be the junior developers you hired today. That's it.
I mean, that's it. Like we did it. Like I'm literally out of comments.
Yep.
I'm just sitting here and I don't know. We've done it. So I guess that concludes this episode. If you have any other comments, suggestions, whatever you want to talk about, go and hit us up on the socials. I've been hitting the threads fairly hard lately. So if you want to talk to me, I've been hitting up the threads. It's just HTML, all the things. It's connected to our Instagram as well. And then Mike's also on the Twitter, of course, if you want to DM or chat with him on an X post / a Twitter post, and go and check that out. And remember that if you want to support episodes like this, we are on Patreon. That's patreon.com/HTML, all the things. Check out the tiers. Give that a go. And many thanks to our $3 tier patrons, Tim from the Web Hacker on thewebhacker.com, Jason from Geek Life Radio via geekliferadio.com, Fire Ant Season via fireantseason.com, Garrett Segal, Level Up Financial Planning via www.levelupfinancialplanning.com, and Joshua via silvio.us. Remember that we also have a Scrimba affiliate link if you want to learn with their interactive media player code editor. Go check it out. That will be in the show description as well as on the show notes on htmlallthethings.com. And last but not least, we'd like to give a shout out to Michael LaRocca, a contributing author on htmlallthethings.com. Michael is the author of Self-Taught, the X Generation blog at selftaughttxg.com. Feel free to leave a comment or a review on the platform that you are listening to this on, and this outro will sign us off.
You've been listening to HTML All the Things Podcast. Web development, web design, and small business. We hope you've gotten some useful and practical information from this show. And we hope you appreciate that we talk to you like human beings. And we hope you had some fun. We'll be back soon. But in the meantime, hit us up on social media on Facebook, Instagram, and Patreon at HTML All the Things. And on Twitter at HTML Everything. Until next time, this is HTML All the Things, signing off.